questions. But she quickly just put all our worries aside. And so did Christine and everyone over at the National Park Service. And so today's presenter is a PhD candidate at the University of Texas in Austin in the Anthropology department. As an anthropological archaeologist, she is particularly interested in how material culture can provide another perspective on past communities who have been silenced in the archival record and the contemporary consequences of the silencing. Her current work explores ceramic production at Mission Espada and Rancho de las Cabras in Central Texas. So without further ado, please help me welcome Kelton Sheridan.
Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Kelton Sheridan. So just to start off, this is my first time presenting any of this data. I am in the 7th year of my PhD program, so I'm a PhD candidate, but that means I've passed all my qualifying exams, I've finished all my coursework, I defended my project proposal to my doctoral committee, and I finished my fieldwork. And so now I'm writing up all the data that we all recovered together last year. And in the past couple months, I have been trying to figure out kind of like what it all means. So today is the first time that I've had to really distill it down into a presentation. It's been very helpful. So I'm really grateful to Margo and Dana for having me here this morning. Since it is my first time presenting this, I'll be speaking off the script a little bit, so I hope that's not too boring, but I hope the information's exciting, so you're interested. Okay. Oh, I thought this one.
Hold on. Try it now.
I was working earlier. Okay. Just a quick little technical interlude. Okay, great. So a little roadmap of the presentation. I'll be mostly talking about my dissertation research, but I wanted to give a bit of background on myself. I strongly believe that archaeology is informed by where you come from, your experiences, and what you value. So I wanted to tell you a little bit about that, about myself for that reason. I'll then lead into my work at Mission Espada and how it fits in more broadly into my dissertation. Then I'll finish off with a brief discussion on ideas for future research because as I think most research should do is ask more questions as you go through that I can't answer my dissertation, but hopefully through continued work I can answer them. So yeah, this ideas for future research. So please think about any questions or like future areas of research that you're interested in. I would love to hear them at the end of this. Okay, so who am I? That's me, digging last year at the Mission. I grew up in Pennsylvania, in a suburb outside of Philadelphia. I studied the history of art and anthropology at Syracuse University in upstate New York. And then I worked in cultural resource management before starting my master's in historical archaeology at UMass Boston. I learned how to do archaeology at a field school in Ireland when I was in college and have been doing it ever since. So that was over 10 years ago at this point. Most of the projects I've worked on, though, have been academic projects, which means that the research question that the site director has really drives the work, as opposed to cultural resource management, where it's a bit more like recording and preservation based. A large portion of those projects that I've worked on have been exploring questions of colonialism and colonized communities' responses to it. So, for example, when I was working in Barbados, we were working on a 17th century sugar plantation, excavating in the slave quarters there to get a better understanding of how enslaved communities actively resisted slavery, British colonialism. And then in Guatemala, I worked on, which is there, really beautiful site in the highlands. I worked on a similar type of mission site, Spanish colonial missions, looking at how the Maya transitioned from the post-classic period, right before the arrival of the Spanish, to the Spanish period, like Spanish arrival. So overall, archaeology, and then this is actually Massachusetts. During my master's, we were working on a homestead, a Nipmuc household in Massachusetts, looking at artifacts related to daily life. So archaeology can be really good at exploring these major times of transition that occurred during colonial projects. So it was through working on these projects early on that I myself became interested in exploring these colonial dynamics through archaeology. So that's how I ended up doing my master's. Keeping with this trend of doing archaeology that explored colonialism, I worked with an archaeologist at UMass Boston who had been working in collaboration with the Eastern Pequot Tribal Nation in Connecticut for 20 years to use archaeology to better understand how the Eastern Pequot had adapted to British colonialism after the Pequot War in the late 17th century. A lot of that knowledge had been lost, and the archival record basically either said that they had acculturated to white society, or they just didn't confront the Eastern Pequot at all, because there was a split between the Pequot. So my master's research focused on one component of this bigger research project, where I looked at ceramic collections from 3 different household sites from between the 18th and 19th century to look at changes and continuities in Eastern Pequot ceramic consumption patterns. So while archaeology was one component of this long-term collaborative project, my master's thesis, it took 2 years. So they had plenty of other research projects that all contribute to this like holistic understanding of Eastern Pequot lifeways, like well into colonialism. But the archaeology was just one component of this project. I was also able to help with repatriation efforts, documentary filmmaking for the tribe, teaching tribal members archaeological field methods, because those are practical skills that can get you employed, or just like teach you how to interact more with your history. And I also was able to see firsthand how long-term collaborations between Indigenous peoples and archaeologists could work. So when I came to UT Austin, I was fresh from this experience because I went straight from my master's into my PhD, which means I've been in school for like 10 years, which is insane. I was still thinking about issues of colonialism and Indigenous representation in historic and public narratives. I was originally supposed to do my doctoral research in Guatemala, which is how I ended up at UT in the first place. But after being here for a few months, I shifted my project to working in Texas. I think there's a lot of like glamour that's tied to international archaeological projects, which they're exciting and necessary. But I also think there's so much archaeology that in our backyard, right, that we can do to learn more about a lot of information maybe we don't have. Okay, so part of the process of coming up with this research project was first figuring out what you're interested in, right, or what I was interested in, which for me was specifically looking at Indigenous responses to colonialism in Texas. And then you need to kind of figure out the best location and the best methods to do that. So that's how I ended up working at Mission Espada, because what better location to look at these interactions than at a site that was created essentially for the colonization of Indigenous peoples. Okay. But in addition to my growing interest in,
There we go.
Oh yeah, okay. But in addition to my growing interest in understanding colonial encounters, the project that I worked on for my master's, kind of like what Christine was saying at the beginning, was one of many in a recent turn in archaeological practice that sets working with communities as the standard for practice. These archaeologists doing community, well, not just archaeologists, but people working with the past at all, doing community-driven work, argue that we should no longer be doing archaeology without being engaged with descendant or local communities. So that's kind of, I guess, how I ended up here today, right? So I'm trying to position myself as not just someone who's reporting this information to you, but who's interested in it being like a conversation. It's not just, like I am genuinely interested in hearing your feedback and your interpretations of some of these data sets that I'll be showing. Yes, okay. Okay, so the value of archaeology. Why even do it, right? Because I think, well, okay, yeah, so why are we doing this? We have historical records, especially in the colonial period, right? There's a lot of really important archival work that's been done. So what else can we possibly learn? And honestly, these are questions that I ask myself all the time. In moments of, why am I doing this? But I keep coming back to the insights that we can get from doing archaeology or working with archaeological artifacts, because while excavation can be useful if there are locations or areas of research that are really understudied, there has been a lot of archaeology done, especially in Texas. So as I'll get into in a little bit, some of this work is not just excavation based, it's also working with collections that have been excavated decades ago that kind of are just sitting in repositories now, and trying to put that in conversation with the artifacts that we excavated last year to understand these research questions. So while the written record is extremely useful and can give us many insights into past peoples and events, often the recorders are only giving one side of the story, whether intentionally or unintentionally, because it's not always like a malicious thing. Maybe it's just they weren't interested in what people were doing with pottery making, right? So archaeology can provide another perspective, one based on the objects of the people that were left out of these written records left behind. So through the analysis of these objects, we can understand past foodways, religious practices, economic accessibility, social identity practices, living conditions, that otherwise maybe we wouldn't know today. So overall, for my dissertation, I wanted to know more about the life ways of the indigenous inhabitants of the missions, because I felt as though this was a major gap in archaeological knowledge. Like, how are people like living on the ground day to day, right? Like, I find those things to be really interesting. And how did they respond to the Spanish establishing these missions, right? Were they like, this is great, let's do it? Or did they not want that so much? And the materiality can really provide interesting perspectives on that. Right, so there's a lot of different narratives about the missions, missionization, that they were places of violence and attempted cultural erasure on the part of the friars, that they were places of refuge for many tribes from different raiding parties, that they were necessary. So a lot of the a lot of the narratives on the missions say that they're necessary in order to civilize what they would consider to be savage tribes in the area. Or they have been also discussed as places where native inhabitants were to an extent able to come and go as they pleased. So generally, as with most things, I think, it's never just one way of looking at it. It's that people probably experience the same thing in very different ways. And I think one of the exciting things about archaeology is that it can provide like those complexities of perspectives in the past that maybe we won't get as much from the written record. Okay, so my overarching research question for this project was, can we see practices of indigenous persistence throughout missionization efforts in the materiality? So this project used a two-pronged approach of collections-based work with excavation. I used the collections of artifacts that had been excavated as comparative data for artifacts excavated from the indigenous quarters. The exteriors of priest quarters were excavated in the late 1990s by contract archaeologists prior to the installation of an electrical line. So less research-driven archaeology, but now we have all of this data and artifactual data that we can use for comparative work. So these artifacts provide representation for what the material culture of what the friars might have used during the mission period. So you have these two sites now from the mission, the indigenous quarters and the priest quarters. But I was really interested in seeing, part of the reason why I chose Mission Espada as opposed to the other missions is because Rancho de los Cabras has been excavated, and there's like tons of materials that can be used as comparative data as well. So I was really interested in seeing how, like, what the materiality of like mission inhabitants from the missions looked like compared to at the Rancho, where maybe there wasn't as much oversight by the friars. Okay, so this is the project area up here. So the outline in yellow on this side are all of the indigenous quarters from the 1700s, but kind of stayed away from this area because the southern part, because there had been so much development and the soil, or like the contexts, were more likely to be disturbed. So focused really up in the northern part of the indigenous living quarters. Originally we were thinking maybe because the stone structures weren't constructed until the 1750s, so they were living in jacals up until then. So I was thinking it could be an interesting look at like long-term architectural practices to like do excavations in the plaza. So before we started just digging, we did magnetometry survey in the northern part of the plaza, because this whole area had been shovel test pit, or had been surveyed already back in, I think, the 90s. So we didn't need to go do that, but in that area, you don't just like put in tests, you don't like just start digging somewhere. You kind of want to do a survey prior to make sure you're not disturbing anything. One, so you're not disturbing anything you don't want to be disturbing, and two, to kind of fine tune where might be a good spot to excavate. Magnetometry didn't reveal anything that looked anything remotely like jacal architecture, so we kind of just are stuck to the stone structures, excavating in there. So ended up digging 5 units. The resolution is not super great, but 5 units within these 5 different rooms. Okay. So the excavations consisted of 2 field seasons. The first was in May of last year, where we dug 3 excavation units. And then in October, we did a shorter 2-week field season where we dug 2 excavation units. The photo on the left is a fire, like a hearth feature, so like a fire pit, which is what this kind of like darker soil is down here. And then there's some like burnt animal bones, and you see these like stones outlining the fire pit. And then as we were digging, it was just like kind of like ashy stuff. So we took soil samples from that, but we haven't processed them yet. So that's kind of like hopefully future research. Okay, and then in Unit D, so we had the fire pit, and then we also found, because in archaeology you have artifacts that you find, but you also have features. So they're both associated with like human activity. But the artifacts are objects that you can like pick up and move around, whereas features are more indicative of like human activity. So like a fire pit would be one thing, a post hole would be another example, a wall would be a feature. Sometimes they're like buried and then you can excavate them. So we found a post hole in Unit D in one of the northern rooms as well, that had been, I guess, like filled in with like pottery or animal bone, and they kind of show up as like a darker stain in the soil. So you're like digging down, and then like, oh, the soil's starting to change, like only in this one area shaped as a circle. And it's really cool because it really, like this, I don't know, sometimes my mind is like, the soil really is changing because of the postal. And then this middle photo is a picture of a Pergonalis point, which is an archaic point from like 2000 BCE to 1000 CE. And that was really cool because we found that like day 2 of the second field season in October. And clearly that point was made way before the mission period happened. So kind of what I'm thinking for that is, generally if there's going to be like stone tool production, there's like lithic debris. So if someone's like chipping at a piece of chert to make a stone tool, you'll get like fragments of that process. But this was just in its own right. It was mixed with other artifacts from the 1700s. So kind of what I'm thinking is like the mission inhabitants were probably walking along the river, found a point, and they kept it, right? Because I mean that's like a practice that is continued to today, right? It's like you find something that's really old and that's really exciting and you want to keep it. So yeah, and then we also found some pottery, we found a lot of pottery. Generally you find a lot of like pottery on historic sites, which I'll get into in a little bit. Okay, and then, so in addition to this being a research project, this was also a project that involved working with undergraduate and graduate students from UT. So a lot of these folks work in the lab with me. They're like undergraduate students that wanted more experience doing excavation because they're about to graduate and they want jobs too. So yeah, so that was like a teaching. There was like a teaching component to this project as well, which was it was exciting because that's like a big thing for like a novice archaeologist to go and excavate. Yeah. Okay, you can go next. Okay, so I also wanted to talk a little bit about like what happens between excavation and then like you see artifacts in bags. So at the end of the day, I would take the artifacts back to the lab. So when I was working the first field season in San Antonio, I was living in San Antonio for a month. So I'd bring them back to the house that I was living in and wash them, which is pretty standard practice for archaeology to like wash artifacts in the field. So we would have like half day. I don't know if you guys remember, we'd dig into like 1 p.m. and then it was too hot, so then we would stop digging. Then the rest of the afternoon would be artifact processing. And sometimes undergrads would stick around for that, and sometimes they would not. So a lot of times it was just me in the kitchen alone, washing artifacts. And yeah, so it's just like literally dump them in a bucket depending on the type. If it's like ceramics, you just put them in water and wash them. If it's something more fragile, then you don't do that. But then lay them out based on the context on to dry on like paper towel. And then after that, I would bag them and catalog all of them and then bring them back to the research lab at UT, where now that's where they are right now as I've been doing analysis on all of this. But a big part of archaeology, like the digging is one thing, like I can't remember exactly what the like slogan is, but it's like for every hour in the field, we have like 3 hours in the lab, because it takes a lot of time to process all of this to then be able to have information that's, you can make something of. So, yeah, okay, so once back at the lab at UT, that's where analysis would begin. So basically you take each artifact, like, this piece of ceramic, and then you look at all of the diagnostic attributes on there, enter them into this big Excel spreadsheet, and now I just have like dozens of spreadsheets on my computer with artifact attribute analysis that then I can use later, or anyone can use later. And then, okay, so then once this is all finished in the next couple months, because I've been finishing up my dissertation in the spring, then these artifacts will go back to San Antonio to the Center for Archaeological Research, which is where they will stay. So I don't keep them. They become like for academic, whoever wants to do research on them. And then you have to get like a permit to take them out, right? So they're well protected and well managed. Okay, so what did we find? Overall, from the 5 excavation units, we found 1,326 artifacts. And that is not including all the little pieces of shell, the pieces of animal bone, the charcoal and the brick that we found. Those were weighed, and we found about 400 grams of that. Yeah, so within that artifact assemblage, we found buttons, ceramics, a couple beads, some one bead was like a little plastic jewel, you know, that you could literally buy at Michael's today, which sometimes you find in the upper levels. But then there was another bead that was like hand spun, so that was really cool because it was kind of wonky. I think I have a photo of it in here. If not, I think I brought it with me. Okay. So some notable artifacts. You can't really see the belt buckle super well, but I did bring it so that we can look at it in the box afterwards. Found a belt buckle, a skeleton key. Here are 3 buttons that we found, but we also found a shell button that was like made from a shell into a button. Ceramic buttons, metal buttons, and then this Bernal's point. And that was the only stone tool that we found. We found like debris, but that was underlying all the colonial period stuff. So you can see like a stratigraphic occupation of like pre-colonial people making stone tools, which is really cool. Yeah, so a large percentage of the artifacts that we found date to the 1800s or later. So, which is something interesting because I'm particularly interested in the colonial period, so like the 1700s. So, but people were continuing to live in these houses after secularization. So it makes a lot of sense that the way I'm kind of thinking about it is people were sweeping out these earthen floors, and maybe a lot of the pottery was either taken as they were moving around or were being swept out other places, and so the majority of the ceramics that we found at least date to the 1800s. So one of the things about artifact analysis is that it can be really hard to date artifacts that had long production ranges. But one of the reasons why I like ceramics so much is because they can give you a very tight time range, especially when things start being mass produced in Europe and Mexico City, so they can help date a site. But ceramics can also provide a lot of insight into different practices, like food consumption. You can tell based on the vessel form. If you are finding mostly bowls, then maybe it was more like soup-based diet, right? If you're finding plates, that's like a pretty European technology that they brought over. Economic access, depending on the ware type, or like the decorative type, you can see how like there's like not ledgers, documents with like the price of, what are they called? Catalogs. Oh my gosh, ceramic catalogs. So you can see how much a ceramic type would have cost and how much, like what an assemblage would have cost back in like the 1800s. And then you can also get at questions of aesthetic choice. Are they buying a lot of blue patterns versus a lot of plain patterns, right? These are all like minute things that kind of get at like a bigger picture of like past lifeways. And also, these are pretty easy to compare across space and time. So ceramics, you can, so as you'll see through the rest of this presentation, I really focused in on ceramics because while we found other artifact types like glass, there's not a whole lot you can do with like a bunch of shards of broken, bottle glass. So ceramics can give a bit more insight into that. Okay. So, from the indigenous quarters excavations last year, we recovered 285 pieces of ceramic, also known as sherds, which is a ridiculous term, like a pot sherd versus a glass shard. I don't know, American archaeologists came up with this a while ago. They don't call it that in the UK, but, so if I refer to something as a sherd, I'm talking about ceramics. So this chart breaks down the quantity of ceramic by decorative type. So, for example, like the polychrome painted whiteware, that makes up like 8% of the total ceramic assemblage that we found from the indigenous quarters. Okay, yeah, so this is what we have. So we have a lot of like tin glazed wares, which are, a lot of those were being produced and imported from Mexico, some from Spain. this whole chunk pretty much is whitewares, which were not produced until like the 1800s in Europe. A lot of those are like British made and then imported to the colonies and beyond. And then, yeah, and then we also see lead glazed ceramics like these down here that were both imported and also made locally at some of the missions. So, okay, so basically what I did was, oh yeah, okay, those are the whitewares. So these all date to the 1800s, and since I'm really focused on the 1700s, what I did was in order to be able to compare across the assemblages ceramics from the 1700s, I basically took these out of my data set for the comparison. Okay, yeah, so now this is what we have. This is a more representative of what a 1700s ceramic assemblage would have looked like at the missions. So we have Jackfield pipe, which is interesting. It was made in the 1700s in Britain, but there's a couple sherds that popped up in the excavations. There's coarse earthenwares, terracottas, lead glazed earthenwares, some tin glaze as well, which again coming from Mexico. And as you can see, this particular type really pops out, Goliathware. Can you? Yeah, Goliathware. Okay, great. So what is Goliathware, right? It makes up a pretty significant portion of the assemblage, 49%. It's a pottery type that is found on many Spanish colonial sites in central Texas. It's characterized as having crushed animal bone added to the wet clay to make it easier to form and stronger during firing. It is also generally understood as by archaeologists as like undecorated utility ware, so not something that it's like something that's used in everyday like settings. It's kind of like a versatile ceramic, as opposed to like a fine china where maybe you'd only use it on certain occasions, right? But Goliathware is considered to be like the catch-all for anything. It's also understood to be made by indigenous potters specifically, and locally made at each of the places that it's found. Okay, so when I looked up, because it had made up such a big percentage of the ceramics from from the indigenous quarters, I then looked to see what it was like in the priest quarters and Rancho de los Cabras. So I noticed that it also made up considerable amounts of of the assemblages from the other two locations as well. And since it was, so the reason why I decided to focus in on it is because it's ubiquitous and it's also made by indigenous potters, which if you remember my initial research question was thinking through indigenous persistence and practice at the missions. So to me, it's like, oh, maybe this can get at that research question. Okay, so how was this done? Like, when I say focus in on Goliathware, what do I mean by that? So in addition to looking at the spatial components of where Goliathware is popping up, I also conducted attribute analysis, which I kind of mentioned in the beginning, is taking all of those diagnostic components of the ceramics from the Excel spreadsheets that I have and trying to make sense of each of the components, because as I'll show you in a minute, that like each aspect of an artifact can tell you different things about trends or patterns that would have happened in the past. And then I also conducted petrographic analysis, which I'll explain more in detail later. Okay. So, attribute analysis. This is a piece of Goliathware. Again, the resolution just isn't that great, but it's red on the outside. This is a rim sherd, so if you're thinking about a pot, like the rim piece is broken off. So each of the attributes that I'm thinking through, or that I've recorded and now I'm thinking through. So for example, temper, right? Like what kind? Because not all, since this is a locally made ware, the clay sources might not be as reliable necessarily in terms of like sticking when they're fired. So a lot of times local potters will add something to the clay to make it stronger and less likely to break. So that's called a temper. So some potters add shell, like crushed up shell, if you're like living near the coast, or sand. That's a common one to add to clay. Grog, which is like ground up ceramics, like you can see that, which is really cool. Honestly, so Goliad ware is tempered using crushed up animal bone. And the reason why we know it's animal bone and not anything else is because there has been analysis done on that from different archaeologists, not me, to confirm that it is indeed animal bone that these potters are using. Okay, then also thinking through decoration. So all of the reports that I've read pretty much say that Goliad ware is undecorated. So it's kind of like, well, why are you looking for decoration if it's undecorated, right? But turns out there actually is, as I'll show you in a few minutes, there is decoration on a lot of this Goliad ware from the Rancho. So important thing to know. Surface treatment. So once you've like made your pot, before you put it to the kiln or put it out for firing, some potters will like polish or burnish the outside or the inside, because basically what it does is it makes the clay particles meld together more, which can waterproof a pot. Or add slip to it, which is like a liquid clay, which can also kind of waterproof a pot, or it can just provide decorative components. What other surface treatments? Yeah, polishing, burnishing. And then also thinking about which part of the vessel, right? Because it's a rim, it can tell you about the diameter of the opening of the pot, whether it's a big bowl like this or something really small like that, which can again get to different questions of food waste, right? If you have like a really chunky utilitarian pot that's like this big, maybe and it's burned, right? That's another thing to look for. Maybe it's being used as a cooking vessel. Maybe it's being used as a storage vessel. And then the last thing is the color. And the color is tricky because color can really change depending on how much something was fired, what kind of clay was being used. So it's important to note, but it can't always go based on that. Okay, and then basically you compile all this stuff, and then for each of the sites, and then you compare it across the sites to see different trends and patterns. Okay. So what I found, so after all that attribute analysis, what I found was the Goliad ware from the Rancho had much more surface decoration than the ceramics from the Goliad ware at Mission Espada. So, and when I say like decoration, it's not anything ornate. It's not like, figurines or anything like that. But there are clear, oh man, this resolution, I'm so sorry. Okay, like for example, there's an incised line on this one piece of this pot, this rim sherd. But if you think about like the rest of the pot and you have incised lines, like on the outside or on the inside, that's a decorated pot, right? This one is also, this is interesting because it has asphaltum decoration on the exterior of the pot. Does anyone know what asphaltum is? Yeah, I didn't either. But once I started noticing that this was apparently a decorative component of Goliad ware, I looked it up, and it's this mineral that shows up on Texas coasts, or it shows up on coasts that have oil seepages off the coast. So you find this mineral chunk, and then you melt it down, and then you can paint with it. So you can use it for decoration. You can use it for sealing leaks, waterproofing. It's really versatile, but it's also interesting because it's not really indicative of Goliad ware as a type. It's more associated with Rockport ware, which is a Broncoa like pottery type. So that's definitely something that I'm interested in future research, is trying to, because now there's all these really cool archaeological scientific methods that can do compositional analysis on asphaltum, and then you can kind of trace it across sites to see if they were trading the pot or were they trading the mineral and then using the mineral once it was there. Glaze. That one's particularly interesting because, again, Goliad ware is not considered a pottery type that has glaze on it. Glaze is a pretty, not definitively, but like, it's a European technology. It was not something that indigenous peoples in the Americas were practicing pretty like widespread. I think there's a few tribes in the Southwest that had glaze prior to the arrival of the Spanish, but for the most part, it's considered a Spanish or a European technology. So it's interesting that you're seeing Goliad ware, this locally made pottery type with glaze on it out of the Rancho, but you're not seeing that at Mission. And then lastly, which I think is really interesting, very cool, because this one on the bottom right has a cloth impression on one side. So it's kind of like I don't know, let's say you put down a cloth and then you have your chunk of clay and you put it down and then you form your clay and then you pick it up and then you fire it and you still have that impression of the cloth underneath. So, and you're seeing that at the Rancho, you're not seeing that at the Mission. So, like, the forming and the firing and the decorative process at the Rancho is different from all of those processes at the Mission. Okay, which I'll get into some ideas after I talk about this last component. Okay. So, as I said before, another form of ceramic analysis that I did was thin section petrography. So basically what you do with this is once you've completed your attribute analysis, because you have like hundreds and hundreds of pot sherds that you are going through doing these attribute analysis with, and that's time consuming, yes, but petrography is like, so you're just like looking at them through a microscope, so you really want to like fine tune your sample. So from there, so from there, all of the samples from the attribute analysis that I did, I honed it down into 18 samples to then do thin section petrography. So this method is based on the analysis of the clay matrix and the inclusions in the at a microscopic level. So and it can answer questions as to how a vessel was being formed, how it was being fired, and then decorated. That gets at different questions. Like, it looks at it from a different perspective than the attribute analysis. But it can also tell you about the kind of clay that was being used for the pots, like where it was coming from, and if it was the same clay source as the potters from a different area. So basically the process for making for petrography is you have your ceramics that you've excavated or you've gotten from the collections, and then you essentially shave off a very thin layer from the ceramic, 30 microns, which is like, I can't even make that without you not being able to see it. And then you adhere it to a slide. So these are scans I made of a thin section, or 4 thin sections. They're kind of, and these are like the side of the pot. And then you put it under a microscope that's a polarizing microscope. And then you can see these really cool, microscopic features of the clay fabric. So these 2 photos on the far right are the same clay, but looked at through the top is plain polarized light and the bottom is cross polarized light. So I'll get into the differences in that. Okay. So that's fine. One of the questions I wanted to know about Goliad ware from the Mission and the Rancho was, were they using the same clay sources? Because they're 30 miles apart, right? So are they going to be using the same clay sources? Are they exchanging pots? Are they exchanging clay? Probably not the clay, because it's so heavy. But so to determine this, basically, I was trying to explain this out loud to myself last night, so I'm hoping that it comes through in this. So essentially, what you do is once you've made your thin sections, you have them all on your slides, and then you look at each slide through the microscope, and then you start grouping things based on the different components of the thin section. So really what you're looking for is, I tried to show, what you're looking for is like inclusions, particle size, inclusion size, temper size, and like fabric optical activity. So one of the things about a polarizing microscope is that as you turn it, the optical activity of the minerals will change. So when I say minerals, I'm talking about the clays used for the Goliadware are primarily composed of quartz, feldspar, and then some micas, which, depending on the geology of the region that the clay comes from, it can look very different. So like when I was learning this technique over the summer, some of the people who I was working with had like crazy minerals in their clays, like big ones that you could like see like that type thing. So then when I got to look at the Goliadware and it was looking like this, it was like, oh, okay, so the minerals are much smaller than anything else. And the things that really took I can't really see very well. But the things that really popped out were the bone temper. Okay, so yeah, we have two different fabric groups here. On the left is fabric group 1, so like this area is representative of the clays from fabric group 1, which was from the Mission, and on the right is from fabric group 3 from the Rancho. So the matrix on the left has like a finer, like the matrix on the right, it's kind of like white and sparkly. Can you see that? And then the one on the left is like finer particle sizes, which suggests different clay sources. Oh, okay, so through this analysis, I know it's kind of like, I don't know, kind of hard to tell the difference maybe a little bit. It's like not, it doesn't just like jump out at you. But basically through this analysis I found that all of the samples from the groupings align with the site. So once I did this like blind grouping, I had two very distinct there were 3 fabric groups overall, and then like a couple non-group ones, which is common for a sample size that big. But for the 2 primary groups, all of the samples from fabric group 1 came from the Mission, and all the samples from fabric group 3 came from the Rancho. And same with fabric group 2, all from the Mission. So to me, what that says is if there was exchange of pots, then you would like theoretically see like 1 or 2 of the slides from fabric group 1 would have been from the Rancho, and then vice versa. But there wasn't, yeah. Okay. And then I'll show you just one more slide. I think these are really cool to look at. I like look at them a lot, so I'll only put a couple up here. Okay, so here are 2 photos of the same slide from the Rancho. So these are, on the left is plain polarized light, and on the right is cross polarized light. And the cross polarized light really, like the minerals jump out at you a lot more, whereas the plain polarized light, you kind of can get like these white fragments here, the black fragments, that's all animal bone tempered. So, and this looks very different than the slides from before, or from like right before this one. Like the animal bone is one, there's a lot more of it, and it's a lot more angular, it's chunkier. So, I mean, the process of preparing it beforehand, like crushing it up, maybe it was just like quick, coarse, right? And that's why it's so coarse, whereas like the pots from the other slide, they took a lot more time to like refine it out, so maybe it wouldn't jump out as much in the clay, like once it's fired. And what else? I mean, I've learned a lot about burnt animal bone recently, but one of the things that's interesting is generally the animal bone in Goliadware is white, which means it's calcined. So once bone heats up to a certain temperature, it blackens, but then it calcines. So if it's white, it's suggested that it was heated up a lot. But there's a pretty substantial number of sherds that also had blackened animal bone mixed in with it as well. So future ideas for this research is trying to determine how, like, were they intentionally calcining this bone, or were they just like made a meal, we're gonna make pottery the next day, so they took whatever they had, kept it burning, and then kind of crushed it up? I don't know, right? So that's one of the future research ideas. Because if it is intentional, then seeing that, like being able to show it quantitatively can kind of get at questions of like, was this a practice, like calcining a bone, was that important technologically, or was it important socially? Like, I don't know. Okay. We're coming to the end, sorry. Okay. So what does this all mean? Have all this interesting data and kind of ideas, but putting it all together. So this is my interpretation of all of these like ceramic components. And I'm interested to hear what you guys have to say. But basically, there's a distinct difference in Goliadware production communities at the mission than at the rancho. They're harvesting their clays most likely locally, but definitely from separate locations. And based on that petrographic analysis, it doesn't look like there's much exchange, if any, of Goliadware between the mission and the rancho. Then the decorative elements on the pottery from the rancho suggest that the families who lived there might have had more free time on their hands or felt more free to express themselves through little decorative elements on the pots. Additionally, maybe away from the oversight of the friars, they were able to experiment more with new ceramic technologies like glazing, which, as I said, was like primarily a Spanish custom. And we know that they were making lead glaze, or making pots at the missions that were then glazed with lead glaze. But the fact that it's on Goliadware, it's, I don't know, it's interesting, like kind of melding of cultural, like, technological processes. Also, the ubiquity of Goliadware at the rancho as well as at the mission, especially in comparison to other ceramic types, suggests that the friars were, yes, relying on the labor of the mission and the rancho inhabitants to make their own home goods, but also relying on the knowledge of pottery production that the mission inhabitants had brought with them when they came to the missions. So one of the most interesting things about Goliadware is that archaeologists have linked it to this pre-colonial pre-colonial ceramic type that was produced between 1250 and 1700 CE called Leon Plain. And Leon Plain is identified in much the same way as Goliadware, as having been made with crushed up animal bone. So, but the only reason that they're called something different is Goliadware is only found that if it's found, the same pot sherd is found on a Spanish colonial site, it's called Goliadware. If it's found on a pre-colonial site, it's called Leon Plain. So that, I mean, that's a whole different conversation about classification issues in archaeology. But to me, that suggests that the same pottery tradition had been practiced for centuries before the Spanish ever arrived, and was actively being continued to be practiced in the missions. Like, right under the noses of the friars, right? Or maybe at the encouragement of the friars, because they're living out on the frontier of the Spanish Empire, and they don't have enough pots for people to use. They're like, you do whatever you need. I don't know, right? That's a whole other question. So circling back, okay. So circling back to my original research question, can we see practices of indigenous persistence throughout missionization efforts in the materiality? I'd say based on all of that ceramic analysis that yes, we can see active indigenous persistence of practice despite these efforts at cultural erasure and colonization of the missions. So that's my big thesis. And I guess just to finish off, I always like to think of future research questions, right? Because it's not like this project is now done and we've all said everything we can about like ceramic production at the rancho and the mission. It's like, no, there's like 1,000 other questions this raises, right? So my number one thing is what were they eating in these pots? Like what were these vessels being used for? So there's been a lot of really interesting archaeological analysis on vessels, like Leon Plain vessels from the pre-colonial period, residue analysis that, as I was reading some of these studies, I was like, oh, this seems like a bit inconclusive, but also interesting because you can do residue analysis on ceramic pots, which basically just like takes a little bit of like a microscopic amount of residue or a sample from a pot sherd, and then I put it under like a laser essentially, and then they can get the compositional analysis or compositional makeup of those remains, and then they can tell you if like what kinds of food, if it was like highly fatty foods, if it was like the study that was done on Leon Plain, they suggested that some of the vessels were being used for consuming hallucinogenic liquids. So I think that could be an interesting, like, especially if Leon Plain is really the pre-colonial antecedent to Goliadware, seeing these long-term practices of food consumption throughout colonization as well could be really fascinating. And then, as I mentioned before, with the asphaltum paint, like, where were they getting this from, right? Because these are inland missions now. So were they trading with Karankawa? Were Karankawa coming up? Or how did they acquire this asphaltum? And then especially I'm also interested in learning more about animal bone used for the temper. Because, as I mentioned a little bit just moments ago about all of the different preparation that can go into crushing up the animal bone and all of that, I think that could shed a lot of light on these steps of production of pottery. And I think each of those steps kind of creates, it's like these mundane practices that really make up a life, and then also a culture by proxy, right? It's not just in isolation. It's these are indicative of bigger practices that have been practiced, I think, for centuries. Okay, and then again with the pots, how much were they using kilns versus open firing? So one of the components that I'm about to start focusing in on is using comparative data from other mission excavations, because there has been a ton of archaeology done with the missions, and now all that data is just sitting in reports. And an archaeologist noticed that Goliadware, they were using potentially kilns to fire it as opposed to open firing, which would have been the more traditional way of firing the pot. So it's were they able to use the kiln technologies that I'm assuming the Spanish must have brought with them? Okay, and then lastly, I think this could be really compelling as well, is who made these pots, right? The mission inhabitants, yes, but I'm kind of wondering if we can trace any sort of pottery production after the secularization of the missions into of pottery production in San Antonio, and kind of trace that back potentially to the missions to sort of identify the actual potters that made them. Because right now a lot of the archaeological and historical records suggest that, or not even suggest, they're just we don't know anything about the potters. They're usually at a site in the past there would have been a potter at each mission, right? In the California missions, they talk about a lot of the indigenous groups that the Spanish were trying to colonize out there didn't have knowledge of ceramic production beforehand, so they brought in potters from Mexico to teach them how to make pottery, and then there would be an official potter at each of the missions. It doesn't look like that's happening here, because there's pottery that has been, in existence before the Spanish arrived. So maybe it was a more democratic practice, right? More people practiced it. It was not just one person practiced it in a community. So these are all questions that I still have, and I won't be able to answer in my dissertation, but I would like to answer in my lifetime. So the last thing, this is it. This is the final thank you. I want to say a couple more thank yous really quick. Again, to Margot and Diana for asking me to speak today, but also you guys were in the field with me every single day last year, and I had a great time with you guys. And then a bunch of you also came out to the field with me as well, and archaeology really is a group effort, and every interaction, I've been crying a lot lately, it's honestly every interaction and conversation that we had really informed certain aspects of this project, so I'm really grateful for all of that. And then lastly, I wanted to thank Allison Young, who isn't here, and Christine Jacobs and Melissa Hurtado. Your support from the National Park Service, yes, but also just you guys individually has been really meaningful, and I wouldn't be here today literally without you guys. So thank you.
I'm going to take a question and answer from Christine in just a moment.
Kelton. From Kelton.
From Kelton, I'm sorry, from Kelton. And then afterwards, I'd like to actually give a few minutes to the descendants and the indigenous help that we had, because we had a lot of help there. So I'd like to get some of y'all's perspectives on what it was like to work on something as for me it was let me ask you a quick question. How many of y'all have ever walked around at the missions trying to imagine what the people who lived there were doing, what they were feeling, what they were experiencing? I know I have. And something like this excavation that Kelton allowed us to be a part of was a very spiritual type of encounter for us. So I'm going to allow each one of the individuals who were there, and let me tell you, thank you guys for showing up. Not just there, but today. This is really important. But before we do that, let's take a few minutes for anybody that has any questions for Kelton. If you have any questions, please. Yes, sir.
I wrote down a question.
Yeah.
Was pottery making their main skill, or did they excel at other things?
That's a great question. So I think that's a tough one to answer right now, but I think, there's like an interesting kind of but there's conversation between what the Spanish would have been teaching them, right? These like Spanish skills that they needed to be good civilized subjects, right? Like farming or weaving or things like that. But, oh, well, okay, so that's a good question. So I think pottery production was a commonly practiced activity, but at the rancho, there are a lot more, especially compared to the mission, lithic debitage. So like stone tool refuse, essentially. So what that suggests is that the folks that were living at the rancho were also using not just their traditional knowledge of pottery production, but also their traditional knowledge of stone tool making to maybe supplement items that they would have needed to like survive out there, right? Like knives, scrapers for tanning hides potentially. So that could be one other example of something that they excel at.
Okay, if I can follow up
Yeah,
with
please.
his question, and this is for you and for Christine. Because you indicated that these, the Goliad ware was there, I'm imagining when the priests came in, their purpose was to Christianize the Native Americans, and that included changing the way they ate. But when they get here, I'm assuming they only had a limited amount of dishware. So natives are coming in, they're bringing in their own dishes with them. And as the group grows, you don't have enough for everybody, so they're continuing to make more. Now, there's a lot of oversight of the missions. Is that correct, Christine? There's a lot of oversight of the missions. So they've got the indigenous people really busy doing all sorts of other stuff. When you get to the rancho, there's less oversight. So there's probably more time for them to continue to make their Goliad ware and try new techniques that perhaps they wouldn't have time to do over at the mission. So I think that might be why you're getting some of that decorative stuff when they're picking it up with, I don't know, maybe if it was lace of some sort or something, they're picking it up and it's on the wet clay that's picking it up on there. Maybe they're like, hey, there's a cool technique, lace, glaze. Let's try it out and see what that looks like.
Yeah.
What do you guys think?
Yeah. Something that I was thinking about is there's records that say that there were families that lived at the rancho, so like children, like 4 families because there's 4 adult women that were there, so that's generally like the marker for like a familial unit. But maybe it's like the ceramics were, the kids had it, I don't know, honestly, like maybe children were having a hand in making the ceramics as well, because a lot of the ceramics were kind of like lumpy, like not as refined as compared to the mission ceramics. So, and then that's a good point that you made about the foodways, Margot, because that's another, oh man, I've been having, so we found animal bone as well, and there's been faunal analysis done on the animal bone from the priest quarters, but I have someone who in my department who's doing my faunal analysis, but he's been taking it a while. So that's kind of hopefully going to be one component, as well as looking at the faunal in the indigenous quarters versus the animal bone assemblage from the priest quarters, because sometimes that can get at different, like, were the indigenous inhabitants allowed to go off and like hunt maybe more like deer or undomesticated things, and were the Spanish trying to really hold tight to their Spanish customs of eating certain foods, right? Because that was such a big thing for the Spanish during the colonial period, is maintaining their identity through food consumption. So yeah, does that answer your question a bit?
Sure. Yeah.
Anybody else have a question? Yes.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So on one of the slides, you were comparing kiln-made pottery versus open flame pottery. Did y'all find any remnants or traces of maybe a kiln of some sort there that, you know, maybe showed that they were making the pottery there? It wasn't being brought in from somewhere else.
Yeah, okay, yeah, great question. So at Mission Espada, I know that there are 4 kilns there, and only 1.5 of them has been excavated, as far as I know. And that's kind of something that could be exciting to like excavate in the future, because it can tell you a lot. But right now I think it's assumed to be a lime kiln, so only like lime was fired in there, and then the same with the rancho. They had a kiln there, but it's considered to be a lime kiln.
What is a lime kiln?
It's like, so instead of just firing ceramics, you're firing lime to make for structures, like main structures.
For the walls.
Yeah. So, I don't know, I think that's another area of future research, is learning more about like where they could have fired them in the kiln.
Would it take taken longer to make the pottery in an open fire than in a kiln?
Well, yeah, I think so, and I also think, yes, it does. So it takes longer to fire something more thoroughly in an open fire, but that doesn't mean that they were necessarily firing them for a longer time. It just might have meant like put them in the open fire, fire them as long as necessary to get it like hardened, and then take them out. But I mean, it varies so much because I don't know if you've ever fired anything over an open fire, but it's like really versatile depending on the fuel that you're using, or the clay itself, or the wind, right? Or the type of like, the type of kind of like way you're choosing to fire, like make the firing structure. So
I'm just wondering if they needed more, dishes and stuff, and they weren't coming in from Mexico City or wherever quickly enough, and
yeah,
so the Spanish were saying, we've got to kill them, you guys do your stuff and let's throw it in here and just get it done, so that everybody has got a dish to eat or something.
absolutely. Yeah, I mean, because we have records that the Spanish had like their yearly sort of like delivery system from Mexico City that like went all the way up through these different towns, acquired different ceramics from these different towns, and then they would get up here. But I'm thinking like, geez, all the way from Mexico City on a mule, like that these would arrive intact enough to like eat something off of. Like they were probably, really hoping that they could make ceramics here, which luckily they were able to. So,
Anybody else? Yes, sir.
One of the architectural or unique architectural features of Espada is those bricks. Like none of the other missions have these kind of, mudstone. I forgot what they're classified as. But like my understanding was at least one of those kilns was supposed to be, I think,
a brick kiln?
for the bricks that made those archways
Sure,
in the original
yeah.
structure, right? Whereas like the bricks here in San Jose were done by the Benedictines like way later. It's a different. So I'm curious, and I mean like just like walking the site, it seems like, I'm just supposing, but it seems like to me, you look over the side of that wall and there's the big kind of the land kind of dips down
yeah.
to the river, and there's all of this, I don't know, mud on the side of that hill that potentially I think might have been carved out to make or try to then be kilned to like make those bricks. So I wonder, is there any interest in trying to cross-analyze the material of whatever made the bricks to like if it's the same source or maybe something different?
That's a great question. I mean, I hadn't even thought about that before, but I think that could definitely be something that's like fairly easy to compare, right? Especially if you can get, because one of the things about doing ceramic analysis with like the petrography is finding local clay sources to then create comparative samples. So you can really see, like if the indigenous potters in the 1700s were using the same clay sources that exist there today, it's possible that we could find them and then do comparative analysis, and the same with bricks, right? So then if we do like petrographic analysis of the bricks, then we could also see how they were using the same source or not, right? So I mean, that could be really interesting in future research as well. Yeah.
Any more questions?
Ask a quick question.
Yeah, I have a question. You were saying that you found some artifacts that were there for the Spanish king, that what might tell us that it came from indigenous people. Back then there was no, like the Spanish that used stones and everything didn't come at the rancho versus the missions. They could have been handmade, like
Yeah.
made them up all the time.
Yeah.
But they used the wood, I know how to do that. But
Yeah.
anyway, they used the open fire because they didn't have those things before.
Yeah.
And they were handmade, that was told to us at the ranch. That would make us think, they were really done before the Spanish arrived. So the technique changed when Spanish came because they had their own technique versus the native technique. And that's where the glazing and everything else came in, all the designs and stuff.
Yeah, so I mean that's a good question, because I think there's like an element of continuity in that they are right. So if I'm just going up based off the assumption that the Leon Plain wares, that it's hard to say that these are from, I mean so I'm going based on the assumption that the Leon Plain is the pre-colonial component to the Goliad ware. So while the practice of bone tempering pottery is the same, I think like allowing for changes by virtue of like, you know, colonial impositions through like decoration or anything like that, I think that can still be indicative of the same practices, but not necessarily, but like changed a little bit, having like variation, right? And I think, yeah, I think it all depends on like how you want to classify it, but I think like the bone tempering and the handmade pottery.
So maybe it was all the
That's like
same
a long-term
process with the addition
process.
of glazing and decoration, but other than that, the general component of how to make the Goliad ware remained the same for,
Yeah.
you know, a couple thousand years.
Yeah, exactly. And the glazing, it's not like every single shirt at the rancho was glazed, but there were definitely like a significant number of them. So it might not have been the norm then to now have like a glazed Goliad ware, but it was definitely something that they were experimenting with. Yeah.
So, do we know what kind of animal, or no, you said that's being determined?
Yes, that's an interesting question, because I think it was 2006 was the study done. It's like a histological analysis. So basically it's like you take a thin section of animal bone and you can determine, I don't know how to do this because I am not a faunal expert, but basically what you do is you can see there's like different skeletal components, like micro components of animal, like of bone, of like different animal species. But when it's something so small, like as it's been crushed up into temper and then been exposed to like different firing episodes through like the firing process of the ceramics, it's not necessarily, it wasn't super conclusive beyond that it was a non-human small mammal. So they suggested deer or coyote. I can't remember why they said that in there. I know it says it in the study, but that's kind of something. Yeah, I think that could be an interesting longer
Maybe
term.
because that type of bone would be sturdier than like a bird.
Totally. Yeah, definitely. I mean, that's a great question. I think that's like future research questions of like, why are they choosing mammal bone as opposed to bird bone, right?
Yeah, I think Sean had a question also.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just curious to know if your excavation ever involved tomb sites? Or if you have any knowledge about how the Native Americans' burial traditions are, do they ever include any objects in their tombs?
You know, great question. I actively avoid any that's like something that I'm so uninterested in excavating is human remains for several reasons. Mostly, I think we should just let them lie. That's what it was intended for, and so honestly, I haven't looked so much into the burial practices because I don't want to encounter them in any way.
And quite honestly, the universities and the museums are filled with the remains of Native Americans.
Yeah.
And so they've got plenty of things that they can study with those that they have there without, excavating any new ones.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and that was something that I tried to be as clear about in the beginning is any whiff of any sort of human remains, stop digging immediately and just cover everything back up. Because I think there's been so much history of archaeology doing the opposite. So, yeah. Oh, yeah.
Just in response to burial practices, if you're interested, I'd be happy to talk with you more about compliance with the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act. I've spent most of my career repatriating and reinterring Native American human remains. So a topic for an entirely different day, but and have instructed at the National Museum of the American Indian on this topic. So happy to share any information. But yeah, this is not that project.
No, actually not. We can learn so much about pottery, right?
Thank you, Christine. So you guys heard, do you have any questions about that? She's your lady.
Yes. Yeah.
Any other questions before we take a quick break? Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, on one of, I saw like very little of, Puebla pottery.
Oh, yeah.
I thought that was interesting because, because that's kind of like where the Espadas are from.
So
I found that interesting.
Yeah, the Puebla pottery is it's like a tin glazed pottery that was brought up on the supply chain basically in the 1700s. It's like I think like Mexicans, Spanish introduced like the tin glazing components. But the Puebla potters, I think that's like a really interesting. I don't know as much about it because it's like way further south than what I'm like focusing on, but I think a lot of the potters that they that were making these pots were indigenous potters that the Spanish like taught how to use like glazing customs, but then using their own like traditional knowledge of ceramic production as well. But yeah, I mean that is interesting.
We're going to take about a 5-minute break. Please come back because we are going to visit with some of the people who helped during the excavation and hear from them, what that experience was like. So 5 minutes, if you need to go to the bathroom, they're right across from here.
Water,
coffee, more pastries, it's still there.
Hey, how are you?
Try not to. Yeah. I can't find a camera.
Yeah, I remember that. Oh my gosh! No, I'm still making
So I didn't know that this was present here.
You want me to know what's from here?
I mean, some of those sites, it's apparent to me like most of the had so much which makes sense that they were so far from it, right? You know what I mean? So fascinating to like
It was a long night, but it was very successful. It was a good event. And we got a lot of good feedback from the surveys, which is important. They know there was, they designed something using smart sheets, which is, I'm going to work with John and Christina. Yeah, so we can figure that out for our own surveys. And then they encouraged people, they did a raffle to encourage people to do this, we'll give you into the raffle, we'll give you something. Yes, lots and lots of people did.
Oh, okay. Wow,
Yeah,
wow.
so we have very good turnout on the surveys. So that's something to keep in mind for the future.
Yeah.
And since they had a table there, it's like, it's just better than trying to track people down. So, yeah. It's a good event. Learned a lot of good So, I'm going to hop by there on my way to go out to dinner and check it out.
What time? Like 6 p.m.?
6 to 8 or something like that.
Is that our event or just we rented out the space?
No. This is our space and Blanche rents out.
Blanche will help manage that.
Blanche manages that, yeah. So, but it's a big event.
Any good help her?
Jessica.
Oh, just Jessica.
Yeah. So, and honestly, I think Jessica might be managing that tonight because we aren't involved in any of the setup.
Yeah.
She probably just needs to be there to like
So
ask
KLRN's
questions.
set up, responsible for
They're
set up.
responsible for the entire thing because they're far in space. I don't know if they pay a fee or not, but that's something to think about in the future. So,
It's a split wing, so it has 2 lenses on it, but it's going to shoot it on the Oh yeah, I was thinking that too. Yeah, have a 3-dimensional copy.
Oh my God.
Find out if they're using it to do like all you know, when you get like 14 cents each, to get the 4x6s.
Oh.
And it can tell you all about the conversation. And then connect it to other places.
And there's a little viewer for cell phones.
I tend to lean toward like actually like archaeology.
If it's on your naked phone, you have a piece on it like I do. That's why I have a separate phone. Because you have to put the pitch right on the clip. It's like 4 tiny glasses, right? And you can just look at them and you can go like this. And then the next one,
Like the mission that we were on was right next to the and they like built a place right next to it. And that was what they were doing. And it's like sort of inside built right next to it. They continued to try to like farms to come there all the time. So then I didn't want to come in and see it all. But there's so many out there. Yeah, one of the guys, the director of copy, he's on the resources. Because there's been so much
If you guys would grab your coffee or your drinks or your fun dulces, and we will get started. I'm going to start with Alice. so that Alice can tell us what that would be like for her.
And I think before you leave, Kelton brought some goodies to look at. So she'll set it up here for you to look at the artifacts and stuff. So don't leave afterwards, you can come and look at the artifacts.
Much as that, before most of y'all leave, those of y'all who were part of this group, we should be sure to go up a picture with us so that we can have all of them back together again. But it would be nice to get a picture of the whole group though, everyone who's here today.
First, I want to thank you for having me there and the blessing.
And we're letting Alice sit down because Alice is a very faithful member who's here at our presentations every single month. She's got a bad knee. One of these days she's gonna get around and have that taken care of. But that's why she said that. You need to put it a little bit closer to you. So you can
Hear me out?
Hear me out? Yeah, turn that way.
Hello. First, I want to thank y'all for having me there and for the blessing and the opening of the excavations and for meeting a wonderful person, my friend, that almost scared her to death this morning.
For those of you who do not know, every time that we would go in, which was every day that we were excavating, before you can start digging, there is a prayer that Native Americans do to open up the ground. And Alice was very, very kind, very faithful to come in every single time to do the prayers for us. So thank you very much.
And closing.
Yes, for opening and closing.
I thank you for that. For me being there, it was very spiritual. Mostly. My ancestors come from there, and I can feel them when I walk around there. When I'm there, I can feel the breeze, I can hear them talking to me. I can see them walking around at that time. If you go slowly walking through the areas, it's very quiet. For me, it was very quiet and serene. And I could actually really, when I close my eyes, see them when sun rays hits a certain way, or when it hits your face, you feel it. You feel like a brush, like somebody telling you I'm here, or thank you for being here. I would always feel that thank you after the prayers all the time. It hit me hard the first time, and I cried at home because I really felt it. Then afterwards, every day that I'll go by, when we started doing more, they started doing more, and I was there for others. I could feel just a simple breeze like that, or my hair used to go like that. And I would get chills, but I know they were there, and I know they were happy that we were doing it the right way. So I'm very grateful to you all for that. I really am, and I'm proud to be part of this. And
Thank you, Alice.
I'm glad I could make it all the time. Because I didn't want to
Here's the extra step she went to. There was
What?
one day that she could not go.
That's what I was gonna say.
And do you know that she still did the prayers from her home
The
over
phone.
the phone?
over the phone.
You know, we laid the sage and we laid the tobacco, and she did the prayers right over the phone for us.
Yes, I did. That was
Thank you.
very, very, very
And she was sick, that's why she couldn't
good
come.
experience for me too. So I'm very grateful for that.
Thank you. We had some really amazing, this is interesting, yeah. We barely met Matilda and Gary last year at the excavation. And these were individuals, I'm not sure that they were expecting to work when they got there. They just came to see what we were doing, and we said, here's the shovel.
Start sifting.
Just start sifting.
But they were faithful and
Yes, they
came
were.
and assisted, and I think we were able to work a lot faster because we had that extra help. It wasn't just us, so. Gary, you wanna see what the experience was like for you? This is for Facebook to hear you.
Okay, it's on Facebook.
Turn it that way so they can see.
Well, we thought that Kelton was so professional in the way that she handled this, that we recommended to other archaeological friends that we have throughout the state of Texas to work on other projects outside of this one. And she has moved up very quickly in doing so. So I want to congratulate you. And just that little bit, that we got to know you, there's tons of more other things that we take care of in the state of Texas. And so thank you for getting involved in all those other things too. No pressure.
Getting scared.
Hello, my name is Matilde Flores. I want to thank also Mission Descendants, for putting this presentation, and Kelton for being here, right, and for giving us the opportunity to be a part of something that we didn't know how it was going to go, right? And so, like Gary said, we are involved in other projects as well, and to see you there, be a part of the team, that's awesome. And it was like Margot and Diane said, we had just came in and we stopped by, I saw it on Facebook, and I said, why not? Why not be a part of it? I wanna get into it. I think it's something that I wanted to perhaps do it when I was younger, be archaeologist, but of course that wasn't what took place, right? But to just have that opportunity has been awesome to see all of the the process that you have to go through, right, doing this work. And I know that at times it's not, we see like, oh, they're digging, because so much has happened, right? But as I hear from, others, the only way that we're going to get to know what really goes on is becoming a part of it, right? And wanting to know and sharing from both sides of maybe how we would want things to take place, but learning from each other, right? And I think that's what I've learned from one of our elders, Mary Wojnowski, that I've learned so much. She's been doing archaeologists, and she's in New Mexico, Pueblo Comanche, and she's been doing archaeology for 30 years, and she's seen so many things, but she tries not to become too emotional, right, about it. She knows it's something that she wants to see it, she wants to be a part of it, and then if they find something she can handle and then, do what she needs to do, right, and the right thing to do. So I think the same thing here, right, and but I think it's an opportunity that, that can be given, and now we see what we find, and it's exciting to hold this artifact in your hand and this the knowledge point, right, and hold it in your hand, and then you can feel
By the way,
connection
you're the one who found it at that point.
To the ancestors. And I've been blessed, to hold something so old in my hand. Not only here, but at another archaeological site that we're a part of as well. And so that's the connection that we need at times. It's like we're holding something that our ancestors did. Right? And so that for me just doesn't have any words to express the feeling of it, right? But thank you all.
Before we go to Melissa, let me just say, when you guys think of excavations, are you thinking a shovel? Because let me tell you, while there were shovels, we did not dig with the shovels. We used those to fill those back in. And this young lady right here actually did all the work. And with a much smaller hand tool that she was very carefully excavating. And we don't get me wrong, we were working hard too. But a lot of times we were just kind of standing around while she was doing her work and filling in the buckets. And when she filled in the buckets, then we would put them into the screens. And then is when the work started. We built up a lot of muscle with the screens. And then of course when you find something really cool, like when Matilde found that at this point, we're all stopping to celebrate. We're like, yay! I pass it around, everybody look, and then it's like, oh. And this is something you might want to take a look at as well. But there was a lot of work that she put in, but a lot of work that all of these individuals put in as well.
And it wasn't easy at times because we did get rain.
Yes.
So
we were
my
making
God,
mud.
they weren't making it easy for us, I tell you that. They're like, we want it, and there was mud.
Yeah.
It was mud at times, and that was not easy at all.
And there was sun every day.
Right.
A lot of hot sun.
Before we go to her, I'm gonna say some things and then we're gonna shut off Facebook Live. But I wanna say, it's gonna sound like I'm closing up, and I am closing up for you on Facebook, for everyone else, stick around. I wanna say that when y'all saw that bucket where she would go home afterwards and clean up, half of that stuff I did and she probably threw it away. Because I would find a bunch of things and I'd be like, oh, this is cool, put it in the bag. Oh, this is cool, and put it in the bag. And it probably wasn't anything important, but to me it was cool, so I went in the bag.
I learned a lot about the geology of the site.
And this was even after she gave us clear instructions of what to put in the bag and what not to put into the bag.
Kelton, if you do this again, you have to instruct me daily. Because from one day to the next, I forget. So.
She was really funny because, you know, we take her, what about this one? Oh, that's really nice. No, we don't need that one.
Then you started bringing the water cup on site, so it took away my job in the lab. We started cleaning the artifacts.
So it was a very emotional and spiritual experience. And we thank you for that because without that, we go to the missions and it's just another day at the mission. You know, you feel and you think and you imagine, but being able to do that, it's like you feel a spiritual connection with your ancestors. And that's something that we wouldn't have had without you and without the National Park Service. So we thank y'all for giving us that experience, you know, because we wouldn't have had it otherwise. You wish and you want to, you imagine all these things and you want to know. I mean, I'm one of those people that I need to, not yet, I want to know everything. But of course, I can't know everything because it was in the past. And so sometimes it's disheartening, you know. And my poor husband, like I toss and turn most of the night, and he probably doesn't get but 3 hours of sleep. And so I'll ask him questions sometimes, and he's like, "What are you talking about?" But he's very patient and listens to me. So doing this excavation with you answered a lot of questions for me. So it gave him a few more hours of sleep tonight. So I appreciate that. We're gonna wrap up. I wanna thank everybody for coming on. I thank Facebook for being faithful and watching like you do every month. There's a lot of things that the San Antonio Michiganians are doing coming up. The main thing is November the 9th is our annual, or this year it is our 3rd annual Cristela Cortez King Fry Bread Social and Holiday Market. If you are an artisan and you make things at home, you craft things at home, see me, we need you. We want you to come and sell we want you to be a vendor at our Fry Bread Social. If you're not crafty, like I'm not, you know, I see. Have you ever seen the show Nailed It? That's me. I can look at something beautiful and I can do that and it turns out totally different. So if you're like me and you want to volunteer for that, come see me. We need you too. We're hoping to make this a huge success. We're going to do things a little bit different this year than just the fry bread and the vendors. We're going to have people out there giving information.
First of all, this is the first year, because for those of you who have been with us for the last 2 years, you know we've always done it at the VFW. This year we're outgrowing it, and they didn't have a place for us to do the fried bread inside.
So this year we're going to be at the Mission County Park Pavilions. The whole park is ours. So we're having people out there giving information about Native Americans prior, during, and after colonization, our waterways, what was happening, how we used it. National Park Service, I believe is gonna be out there, San Antonio River Authority is gonna be out there, May Plaza is gonna be out. We're gonna have a lot of different things. Lee Apache Tribe of Texas is gonna be out there giving information. A lot of other organizations, please come out and spend the day with us, or
Come eat some fried
or an
bread.
hour or two. Come eat some fried bread. Our Cocino Las Mitoteras does some amazing fried bread. We take, we are a membership-based organization, so if you are a descendant, come see me, fill out an application. Just so you know, you don't get membership right away, because we do check all your information to ensure that it is correct and proper. If you're not a descendant, we want you to. Come be a friend of the San Antonio Mission Indian Descendants, because we got a lot of work.
Those go a lot quicker. 'Cause we'll have to
Yeah, those
check
go a lot
everything.
quicker, so, we can do those in a few days. But thank you guys so much for your faithfulness and your support. This is the last presentation of the year for us. We'll start again come January. If you guys have ideas, we're booked through, June right now. If you have ideas of something that you would like for us to present and find, presenters for 2025, come see me. I will take your ideas as well. So there's a lot of things that we want to do next year. We're just growing, we're getting bigger, we're getting better. We need people. So come and see us. Thank you guys, and stay afterwards.